Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 of Thomas Egenes' Introduction to Sanskrit. Before we start on Lesson 2 proper, I just want to mention two things I forgot to say in Lesson 1. It's on page 5, paragraph 1. I forgot to explain anga and the word ting. So let me now go to shared screen with you. Oh yeah. The root dhatu, the word dhatu, which as I explained in regular language means an element, as in a chemical element, but linguistically means a root, as the irreducible, the smallest irreducible element of a language. It forms a stem which is called in Sanskrit the anga, like that. Sometimes written the ng sound, sometimes written with a line over the n and sometimes with a dot over the n in transliteration. It makes no difference, it's both the same. Just don't confuse it with the n with a tilde, which is a ny sound, or an n with a dot underneath, which is the retroflex n sound. So anga, the basic meaning is a limb, as in a limb of the body, and then by extension a member or a constituent part of something. And you may know the word from, for example, Ashtanga Yoga, which is Ashta Anga Yoga, the yoga consisting of 8 parts. And Buddhists may know it as the Ashtanga Marga, or in Pali the Atanga Magga, which is the 8-fold path. I'll just do that for you in Sanskrit and Pali. That's Ashta Anga Yoga, which by Sandhi, that's the conjunction of vowels, becomes Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-fold yoga. And the in Pali, Atta Anga, same, Magga, which becomes the Atanga Magga, the 8-fold path. In Sanskrit, it is the Ashta Anga, which then merges, becomes the Ashtanga Marga, which is the 8-fold or the 8-limbed path, or the path having 8 sections or constituent elements to it. So that is the meaning of the word anga. The other odd word appearing page 5, paragraph 1, is this word ting. Ting is one of the numerous words, purely made-up word, made up by Panini, the grammarian Panini, as a kind of abbreviated code word. So, for example, rather than saying all verb endings indicating person, number, tense that are added to the stem, rather than just saying that, he just used the word ting. So if you use the word ting, he's talking about the entire range, the entire set of verbal endings. And there are various other words that he made up, quite a lot of words that he made up. For example, when Panini is describing the present tense, rather than talking about the present tense of the verb and all forms of the present tense of the verb, he just used this made-up word, lurk. So whenever you see Panini using the word lurk, you know that this is a shorthand, his coded way of saying all forms of the present tense. And for example, a similar one for the imperfect. He used the word lung. So whenever you see Panini using the word lung, you know he is talking about the imperfect tense of the verb, and in all of its forms. You don't need to learn these words, but you do need to be just aware of what these words represent. So when you see a comment like the comment in at page 5, paragraph 1, where it says the stem adds an ending in brackets, ting, to form a verb, just know that when you see these odd words like that, ting, it's this Paninian shorthand. Right, now let's get on to lesson 2 proper. And we deal with the first 25 consonants. These are the consonants that are called stops. And they're called stops because it's the same in English. They are consonants that actually momentarily stop the passage of air through the mouth. So if you just pronounce yourself a consonant such as s, r, h, w, the air remains flowing through the mouth as you say them. Whereas when you pronounce a letter like k, akka, hatta, hippo, the breath momentarily stops when you put the vocal organs in the position necessary to pronounce that letter. For example, bitter, bitter. The breath is not flowing while you're saying the b, and it's not actually flowing when you're saying the t. That's why they're called the stops. In Sanskrit, the word for stop, and you can learn this word, you're going to use it as time goes on, not in a grammatical sense. The Sanskrit for stop is the word sparsha. Sparsha actually means touch. And sprishtavyam, for example, sprishtavyam is the sense of touch. And that word is used because the tongue, whichever part of it, or for the last set, the labials, just the lips, are actually directly touching each other. Or the tongue is touching somewhere on the inside of the mouth, or the lips are touching each other. So that's the meaning of a stop, a sparsha. In other words, contact is being made. There is a touch being made between the tongue and the part inside the mouth or the lips. The consonants are arranged. If you look at the diagram on page 9 of Egenes, the consonants are arranged in an actually fairly scientific manner in Sanskrit. And the way the vowels and then the consonants go, we've done the vowels, the consonants, the order in which they're put here, and you'll go on to the remaining consonants later. There's quite a logical order, especially for these 25 consonants that you see on page 9, because they start with the consonants that start at the back, where the contact, the tongue contact, is at the back. The k, you see, you feel where the tongue comes into contact with the palate, soft palate, k, and then a bit forward, ch, further forward, da, further forward to the teeth, da, and now right forward to the front of the mouth to the lips, ba. So the consonants in the traditional Indian order, look up in any Sanskrit or Pali dictionary, and it's the same for languages that are based on the traditional Indian ordering. All of the languages of ancient and modern India, and including languages like Thai and Burmese and so on, Tibetan as well, they follow the same basic ordering of the consonants that Panini devised around 400 or 500 BC. So they go and ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. Note, most importantly, the aspiration and the non-aspiration. That's where a consonant is pronounced with an audible push of air after it and without an audible push of air after it. In Sanskrit, actually, the unaspirated is called alpa prana. You know the word prana, meaning breath. And the aspirated are called bahu prana. Literally much breath. Alpa prana, little breath. Bahu prana, much breath. English speakers generally find it easy to pronounce an aspirated unvoiced consonant, that's ka, cha, ta, ta, pa, because that's what we normally do in English. They're not quite as emphatic as that. The English speaker finds it more difficult to pronounce, or at the beginning of a word immediately followed by a vowel, to pronounce a perfectly unaspirated ga, ja, da, da, ba. We tend to say ka, cha, ta, ta, pa. But it's important to make that distinction. Ga, ka, cha, cha, da, ta, 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 ba, pa. Conversely, in English, we find it fairly easy to say the g, j, da, da, ba without the aspiration. That's how we normally do it in English. We find it more difficult to make these voiced consonants with the aspiration. So ga, gha, ja, ja, da, dha, da, dha, ba, bha. The fifth column is what's called the nasals. Anunasika in Sanskrit. Nasa is nose. Anunasika is through the nose, because the sound, the air still comes through the nose, though not the mouth, as we're pronouncing these. So, the air is stopped from coming out of the mouth, but it's going through the nose. That's why it's called nasal. So the which we have in English, like in the word sing, ink. The difference is that we never have it at the beginning of a word. They don't in Sanskrit either, except for grammatical purposes when you're talking about the letter ng. Then there's the ñ sound. That's the one that's the ng, written with either a dot or a dash over it. It's the same. This is what it is in Sanskrit. And the ñ, written with the tilde, like the Spanish señor, mañana, the ñ sound. N, subdotted to indicate that it's cerebral. So the tongue isn't against the teeth for it, as in n, but it's a little further back in the mouth and pointing upwards. N. Then the n, ordinary dental n, which is more like our n, and ma, which is exactly like the English ma. So reading across now, ka, ka, ga, gha, nga, cha, cha, ja, ja, nga, sorry, nya, da, ta, da, dha, na, da, ta, da, dha, na, and ba, pa, ba, ba, ma. Going now to page 10 and looking at some of the Sanskrit expressions for the letters of the alphabet. notice, and it's very helpful for Sanskrit, that every Sanskrit sound is represented by only one letter. So in other words, if you hear a Sanskrit word being spoken, you automatically know how to spell it correctly. And Sanskrit doesn't have anything like our right, which could be R-I-G-H-T or W-R-I-T-E or W-R-I-G-H-T, as in a playwright or a wheelwright, or rite, R-I-T-E, as in rites and rituals. That's impossible in Sanskrit. If a word, say, if the word right, there would be only one way of writing that in Sanskrit. Conversely, and equally helpfully, whenever you see a word written in Sanskrit, whether in transliteration or in the Devanagari script, there is always only one pronunciation of it. So it's very helpful and useful for us as learners that you get this unfailing one-to-one correlation of sound to letter. And this reinforces the point I'd made in an earlier lesson. I always emphasize to the students that what is of supreme cultural importance in the Vedic tradition, and then forward through even up to the more modern Sanskrit times, Sanskrit-speaking times, that it's the spoken word is what is culturally important. Script is secondary. A script is devised for purely utilitarian purposes, and that is to convey accurately the sounds of the language. And Devanagari is a fairly recent invention in the grand scheme of things. Devanagari script did not exist 3,000 years ago when the Vedic hymns were first composed, maybe even before then. Devanagari script did not exist at the time of the rock inscriptions and the pillar inscriptions in Pali of King Ashoka. So again, I emphasize that when we are, of course, we will be learning Devanagari in this course, but when you're reading Sanskrit in the Roman script, transliterated into Roman script as we're doing now, you are not cheating. It is genuinely Sanskrit, because for the Indians, it is culturally unimportant what script you are using. What is culturally important is that it is a script that accurately represents the sounds of the language. So note also that because we have only a limited number of letters in our Roman alphabet, we have to insert an H for the aspirate. So for example, the ka and the ka, we write with it because it's pronounced with a puff of air, a ka. In Devanagari, that is a ka, and that is a ka. They're each a single letter. So the native speaker of any Indian language, when he hears the sound ka, for him it's not two sounds, a k plus a h. It is a single sound, just as in English, for example. In the word tank and the word thank, we don't look at the th as a t-hang. It's a single sound, a th sound. It's just a digraph. It's a single sound written with two letters. It's pretty much the same exactly the same really in India. These are just a single letter, ka, ka, and then pa, 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 pa. That's pa, and this is pa. Let's go pa with a little hook on the end of it, and ba, 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 Coming now to page 10, paragraph 4, the sound ka is called kakara. Now, with the exception of r, all of the sounds, if you want to say the name of a letter, we have A, B, C, D, and so on. In Hebrew, it's got Aleph, Beth, Gamel, and so on. In Devanagari, sorry, for the Sanskrit sounds, you talk about the kara. Kara is from the root kri, meaning to make. So it's the letter k is the kakara, which is the ka maker, the thing that makes a ka, and so on. The only exception is ra. You don't say rakara, but repa. But all of the others, kakara, kakara, gakara, gakara, and so on. That's the names of the letters. And as an interesting aside on the use of this word kara, maker, there's a complete little rabbit hole here, but learn it because it's quite interesting. The word for I in the sense of me, is aham. Ahamasmi, I am. The Sanskrit for ego, the sense of I, is the ahankara. Literally the I maker, the me maker, that which creates the sense of I and me, so the ahankara. And in modern Hindi, translating, for example, modern psychological Freudian terms, the word for the ego in Hindi is the ahankar. By the way, when you hear me say words in Hindi and I drop the final a off, that's correct, because in modern Hindi, the final a isn't pronounced. So in Sanskrit it would be ahankara, in modern Hindi, ahankar. So paragraph 5, each row is divided into 5 sounds. Which they call the pratama, dvitiya, tritiya, chaturta, and panchama. That's first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And they always go in that order. Some sounds are aspirated, mahaprana. A few moments ago I gave you the bahuprana for aspirated. You can also say, bahuprana or mahaprana. Bahu is much, maha is great. Maharaja, great king. You can say mahaprana, great breathed, with a great breath, the puff of air after it, as opposed to the alpa prana. You see in the second line of this paragraph 6 on page 10, alpa prana, little breathed. Some are voiced, that's ghoshabat, ghosha. Ghosha is voice, and the suffix vat meaning possessing, possessed of a voice. And some are unvoiced, aghosha. So the negating a at the beginning, the same as the Greek negating a, meaning non, aghosha. Some of you may recognize this word, for example, in the name of the famous Buddhist author, Ashvaghosha, Ashva horse, Ghosha sound, odd name, just the name meaning horse sound, somebody who makes the sound of a horse. And as I mentioned before, the nasals, looking at the end of paragraph 6 on page 5, the anunasika, anu, through or along, anunasika, along the nose, pronounced through the nose, because when you pronounce the nasals, ng, nya, mra, na, m, the breath doesn't come out of the mouth, but it does continue to come through the nose. Now, paragraph 7 on page 10, continuing for most of page 11. Do not take too seriously the explanations of how they're pronounced. You can hear me pronouncing it, which will be reasonably correct. There's plenty of stuff on the internet to show you how it's pronounced. There is in the page accompanying this video, where the link is available, I've given links to some excellent videos that will show you how they are correctly pronounced. And even without those, just look on the internet. It's all over the place. I'm finding almost a new one every time I look, of very useful, perfectly correct ways of people teaching how to pronounce these things. So there's just no shortage of it. So don't be put off by, for example, in page 11, the D. I mean, look at that. On the third line down, fourth line down, subdotted D, D like the D in dynamic. Well, it's just not any more than the next D down, D like the D in dynamic. He shouldn't be doing that. That's a little bit naughty. They're pronounced entirely differently. The subdotted, the retroflex, da, ta, da, da, n. The dentals of the tongue up against the teeth, the, the, n. Get it from listening to it rather than from this not very satisfactory explanation of the book. Things like the English DH and redhead. Well, no, we don't say redhead. In Sanskrit, it's the sound. English redhead sounds entirely different. Notice now at the bottom of page 11, paragraph 8. We won't be seeing this in classical Sanskrit, but you will be seeing it in Pali. Those of you who are students of Pali, and those of you who want to go back to the ancient, the pre-classical Sanskrit, back to Vedic, take note that you have the letter da. If it is intervocalic, that means there's a vowel on each side of it. It becomes a l. So the very first line of the Rig Veda is Agnimirle. In Sanskrit, pure Sanskrit would be Agnim Ide. Ide means I worship. Agnim Ide. But because it's got a vowel on each side of it, in Vedic, it becomes Ile. And I'll give you one example for Pali. For example, in Sanskrit, he or she plays, is kridati, and in Pali it becomes kirati. The kr becomes a k in Pali, and the d becomes a l because it's got a vowel on each side. Incidentally, the same phenomenon we see in modern Hindi, where the intervocalic D, sorry, subdotted D, becomes rd. So, for example, what was bada, which would have been written like that, is in modern Hindi and Urdu bada, rda sound bada. Right, before we wind up this first section of lesson 2, we'll just look at the vowels that are presented on page 12. There's the vocalic j and the long r, the l sound, that's the subdotted L, which is very rare and occurs only in one root of the language, and the vowels e, I, o, and au. Now, the writing of the subdotted r, it's given in a more complex form in the book here, like that. In fact, you can write it just like that. Watch this. Dum, dum, dum. And the long one, r, like that. That's the more normal way. That's how it's written in the handwriting. And the initial r you find in names like Rishi. Rishi is a sage or a seer. So there we have this is the short r here and the long r there. This long r is, I don't think there's any word in the language that actually begins with a long r. You find it in words such as the pitta root, the stem pitar, nominative pitta, father, genitive, accusative plural, pitrn, and genitive plural, piternam. It's in that kind of word that you'd see it mostly when in the stems ending in a long ta, brata, brother, kirta, doer, pitta, father. The r, it's written like an L. You know how the L is written like that, and then this one with a hook, a curl at the bottom, is the subdotted r. It never occurs at the beginning of a word. There's only one root in the language in which it occurs, which is written like that, which is klirp, which is to imagine, and the verbal noun form of that, an imagination, and therefore an eon, because an eon of the universe is an imagination in the mind of Brahma in Hindu thinking, is a kalpa. So we often see it, of course, in the word kalpa, but it's from this root klip that it comes. The long vowel, always long, e, and a. Practice that. E, a. So etad, like that. And the o and the au, in the textbook, bottom of page 12, you'll see it written in the cumbersome, complex way. You'll see it in print like that. It's you normally won't see people handwriting it like that. The handwritten form is much simpler, just as for the a. And the a. The commonest way to write it in handwriting is just with like a 3, and a little joining line to the stroke. That is the a that we've had, and the a, and the o and the o are then made with the o is made like a long a with a hook over the upright, and the au that's the o, that's the au. In printed books, you'll mostly see this complex form the way it's shown in the book. Sometimes in printed books, you'll also see this simplified form. In handwriting, I don't think I've ever seen anyone writing the complex form. You always see it people writing it quickly like that. So that completes lesson 1A, and lesson 2A, and in the next video we'll proceed to 2A, where we deal with the grammar of the dual verbs and the exercises.